The morning sun was rising over the wide fields of Cedar Ranch. The air smelled fresh and the wind carried the quiet sounds of nature. Birds chirped in the trees, and a distant herd of cattle moved slowly across the pastures. For Daniel, this was the perfect start to the day. He had bought the ranch a few years ago, and it had become his favorite place in the world. It was far from the city, far from noise, and most importantly, far from rules that never made sense. Daniel loved his little red truck. It was old but strong, with scratches and dents that told stories of long drives on rocky roads. This morning he wanted to move it closer to the barn, where he was going to start fixing a broken fence. The ranch needed his attention, and he was happy to spend hours working under the open sky. As he drove slowly down the gravel path, he did not notice a black SUV parked near the entrance of the ranch. The driver was Mrs. Helen Granger, a woman from the nearby neighborhood who was known by everyone as a very strict HOA member. She was often called the Karen of Cedar Hills because she had a habit of complaining about almost anything. Her house was close enough that she could see almost the entire street, and she liked to think she had authority over anything that moved nearby. Mrs. Granger had heard that Daniel had been improving his ranch. The rumors about his new barn and large truck had reached her ears, and she did not like it. She believed that the rules of the HOA extended beyond her neighborhood, even though Daniel's property was clearly outside the HOA limits. For her, control was more important than facts. When Daniel drove his truck onto his ranch, Mrs. Granger immediately got out of her SUV. She wore a bright pink jacket and sunglasses, holding her phone tightly in her hand. She looked around, making sure she was seen by anyone who might be passing. She was ready to act, confident that she would show Daniel what was right. Daniel parked the truck near the barn and stepped out. He carried a toolbox and a few rolls of wire fencing. The morning sunlight reflected off his hair and his face showed a calm, peaceful expression. He had no idea that a storm of trouble was heading his way. "Excuse me," Helen called loudly. Her voice echoed across the empty fields, making the birds fly away. Daniel turned around, surprised to see her standing there with an angry frown. "Yes, ma'am?" Daniel asked politely. He did not recognize the need for anger in her voice, but he was always courteous. "You cannot park here. This is not your property." "You are breaking the rules," Helen shouted. She pointed at the truck and waved her phone as if it were a weapon. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this is my ranch. I bought this land legally. I am allowed to park my truck here and do what I need on my property." Helen's frown deepened. She was not used to being challenged. "You are still in my neighborhood's view. I am a member of the HOA. You have to follow the HOA rules." Daniel took a step closer, speaking calmly but firmly. "I am not under HOA rules. This property is outside your HOA boundaries. I have all the papers. You can see them if you want." Helen's face turned red with frustration. She looked around and noticed that nobody else was there. "This is outrageous. I am calling 911. They will deal with you." Before Daniel could respond, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. He shook his head slowly, feeling both amused and annoyed. "You are really going to call the police because I parked on my own land?" "Yes, I know the law and I am protecting my neighborhood," Helen shouted. She pressed the call button and put the phone to her ear. Daniel watched her for a moment. He knew the sheriff in this area, and he trusted that the truth would come out quickly. He did not feel afraid, but he stayed calm. He did not want to make the situation worse. Instead, he went back to his toolbox and continued preparing the fencing. Within minutes, the sound of sirens approached. A sheriff's car rolled down the gravel path and stopped near the barn. Two officers stepped out. Their expressions were serious, but they were also careful to observe the situation before taking any action. "Good morning," one of the officers said politely. "We received a call about a vehicle on this property. Can you explain what happened?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, officer. This is my ranch. I own it. I parked my truck here to fix the fence and take care of my property. That lady over there thinks she has authority, but this land is outside any HOA." Helen immediately spoke up. "He is trespassing. You have to remove him. This is my neighborhood." The sheriff looked at her, then at Daniel, and asked to see any documents proving ownership. Daniel handed over the deed to the ranch. The officer looked at the papers carefully. It was clear. Daniel owned the property legally, and it was far outside Helen's HOA. Helen's face fell. She realized that her plan was not working. The sheriff turned to her and spoke calmly. "Ma'am, this is private property. You do not have authority here. The owner is within his rights. If you continue to harass him, you may face consequences." Helen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked furious, but the officers were firm. One of them added, "If you try to interfere again, you could be trespassed from this property." Daniel felt a mixture of relief and surprise. He had expected a calm resolution, but he had never imagined Helen would escalate things so quickly. He nodded to the officers. "Thank you. I just want to take care of my ranch." The officers made a note of the incident and explained the legal boundaries to Helen. They also reminded her that the law protects private property owners and that harassment could lead to legal action. Helen muttered under her breath, but finally got into her SUV and drove away, her pride clearly wounded. After the sheriff left, Daniel took a deep breath and looked around. The air felt cleaner somehow. The ranch was quiet again, and the morning sun continued to shine on the fields. He could hear the gentle sound of cattle moving and the wind rustling through the trees. He went back to work on the fence, feeling satisfied. The toolbox felt lighter in his hands, and every nail he hammered into the wood seemed easier than before. It was a simple day, but it reminded him why he loved the ranch so much. As he worked, he thought about how some people could not accept boundaries. Helen had tried to impose her rules on land that was not hers, and she had failed. He smiled to himself, knowing that the truth always matters in the end. By the time the sun climbed higher into the sky, Daniel had repaired the broken section of the fence. The ranch looked neat, secure, and peaceful. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned against the fence, enjoying the view. Even though the morning had started with tension, it ended with clarity. Daniel realized that standing firm, staying calm, and knowing your rights could solve problems better than shouting or anger. Helen had tried to create chaos, but in the end, justice and reason had prevailed. Daniel climbed back into his truck, ready to continue his day. He had work to do on the barn, and there was always something to fix or improve on a ranch. But for now he felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The ranch was his, and no one could take that away. The birds returned to the trees, the wind continued to blow softly, and the sun warmed the earth. It was a perfect day for a rancher who loved freedom, nature, and the simple joy of being in the right place at the right time. And somewhere in the distance, Helen drove away, learning the hard way that rules only matter where they apply. After Helen drove away, Daniel returned to his barn. The morning sun was bright and the field stretched endlessly in every direction. The sheriff's words were still in his mind. He felt grateful for the law and the peace it brought, but he also knew that Helen's anger was far from gone. People like her did not give up easily. Daniel had always believed in calm and careful action. He finished fixing the fence near the barn and moved to check the water troughs for the cattle. As he walked, he thought about the boundaries of his land. The ranch was large, and it would take days to check every corner. He was glad that he had the freedom to roam without worrying about interference, but the encounter with Helen reminded him that vigilance was important. Meanwhile, Helen had returned to her house in Cedar Hills. She slammed the SUV door with frustration. Her mind was racing, and she could not understand why the sheriff had not sided with her. For her, being a member of the HOA gave her a sense of authority, and she could not accept that Daniel's property was outside her control. She called a few of her friends who were also part of the HOA. "You will not believe what happened," she said. "That man parked on land that is clearly in our view, and I called the sheriff. He refused to remove him. We have to do something. We cannot let him get away with this." Her friends listened politely but tried to calm her down. "Helen, he owns that land. The sheriff explained it to you. You cannot just take matters into your own hands." Helen shook her head, refusing to listen. "This is not over. If he thinks he can just do anything, I will find a way to stop him. I am not giving up." Back at the ranch, Daniel continued his work. He repaired more sections of the fence, checked the barn doors, and even fixed the small gate near the pasture. Every task he completed gave him a sense of accomplishment. The ranch was not just land to him. It was a place of peace, work, and freedom. Around midday, Daniel heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. He looked up and saw Helen's SUV slowly coming down the gravel path again. He paused, leaning against the fence. He hoped she would realize that further confrontation was pointless, but he also prepared himself in case she tried something. Helen stepped out of her SUV, her face showing determination. "I am not done with this," she said loudly. "You have to leave this area. You are disturbing my neighborhood." Daniel walked toward her calmly. "Helen, I told you before. This is my property. I am allowed to be here. I am repairing my ranch. There is no law you are enforcing here. I suggest you leave, or this situation will only get worse for you." Helen frowned, not used to being spoken to in this tone. She waved her phone again as if calling 911 would help. "I am calling again." "This is unacceptable. You cannot ignore HOA rules." Daniel shook his head and remained calm. "The sheriff already explained everything to you. There are no HOA rules that apply here. This is private property. You are interfering, and that could be considered harassment." Helen looked shocked for a moment. She did not expect Daniel to mention harassment. "You cannot threaten me," she said, her voice rising. Daniel smiled slightly. "I am not threatening you. I'm just stating the facts. If you continue to interfere, there will be legal consequences. You need to leave now." Helen's frown deepened. She turned to leave but paused, thinking of a new plan. She wanted to make sure Daniel would not feel safe. She drove to a nearby property where she knew some neighbors lived and called them. "You have to help me," she said. "This man is breaking rules and ignoring the HOA. We need to do something together." By the afternoon, a small group of HOA members had gathered near the edge of Daniel's ranch. They looked nervous but were willing to support Helen. She explained the situation dramatically, emphasizing her belief that Daniel was causing a problem. The neighbors nodded but seemed unsure. None of them wanted to break the law, but Helen's confidence made them hesitate. Daniel noticed movement near the edge of his property. He walked slowly toward the field and saw the small group. He waved calmly, not showing any fear. "Hello," he said. "I see you are here. Please remember that this is private property. I own it. I am working on my ranch and you are not allowed to interfere. I hope you understand." The group looked at each other, whispering quietly. Helen stepped forward. "He is lying. We need to take action now." Daniel took a deep breath. He had expected some trouble, but he stayed calm. "Helen, I am asking one more time. Please leave my property. If you do not, I will have to call the sheriff again. You are trespassing." At that moment, the sheriff's car appeared again on the gravel path. The officers had been monitoring the situation because Helen had called multiple times. They stepped out of the car and spoke firmly. "Ma'am, you are on private property. You are not allowed to be here without the owner's permission," one officer said. "This is a warning. If you continue, you will be trespassed and could face further legal consequences." Helen's face turned red. She looked at Daniel with anger and disbelief. Daniel nodded politely to the officers. "Thank you for handling this," he said. The sheriff turned to Helen. "You have already been warned. If you continue to interfere, we will have to take action. This land is private property, and the owner has the right to protect it." Helen muttered under her breath and looked at the group of neighbors. Most of them avoided eye contact, realizing that Daniel was within his rights. Slowly, they backed away from the ranch boundary. Helen, realizing she had no support, finally got back into her SUV. Daniel watched her leave, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. He knew this was not the end of Helen's persistence, but for now the ranch was safe. He returned to his barn and resumed his work, repairing doors, organizing tools, and checking the fence once more. By late afternoon, the ranch was quiet again. The sun started to lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Daniel looked over the fields, feeling proud of the work he had done. He had faced unnecessary conflict, but he had handled it calmly and correctly. His property was secure, and the law had supported him. He thought about the lesson of the day. People like Helen could be persistent, but calm, reasoned action always worked better than anger. He decided to make a few signs to mark the boundaries of his ranch clearly. It would serve as a reminder to anyone who might try to interfere in the future. As evening approached, Daniel finished the last tasks of the day. He walked to the top of a small hill on the ranch, looking down at the fields, the barn, and the truck. Everything seemed peaceful again. The wind blew gently and the sounds of nature filled the air. Daniel felt a sense of satisfaction. Owning a ranch was not just about land or buildings. It was about freedom, responsibility, and respect. Today had tested those values, but he had proven to himself that staying calm, knowing the law, and respecting others' boundaries was the best approach. He climbed back into his truck, ready to head to the house for a well-deserved dinner. He looked back at the barn and fields one last time before starting the engine. Tomorrow would bring more work, but he was ready for it. The ranch was his sanctuary, and he was determined to protect it, no matter what challenges arose. And somewhere in Cedar Hills, Helen drove home frustrated and confused, slowly realizing that rules only applied where they belonged. The next morning, Daniel woke up early to the soft light of dawn. The air smelled fresh and cool, carrying the scent of grass and soil. Birds sang in the distance, and the ranch seemed calm and peaceful. He sipped his coffee slowly on the porch of his small house, looking out over the fields. Everything felt normal, but he knew better than to think Helen Granger would leave him alone. The previous day had been stressful, but Daniel was proud of how he had handled it. Calm and patience had allowed him to protect his property, and the sheriff had backed him up. He decided that today he would continue his work on the ranch while keeping an eye out for any trouble. He climbed into his truck and drove toward the northern pasture, where a section of fencing had been damaged by the wind a few days before. As he worked, measuring posts and hammering nails, he heard the familiar sound of a vehicle approaching from the gravel road. He looked up and saw Helen's black SUV slowly moving toward the ranch again. This time she was not alone. Another woman from the HOA was with her, and both of them looked determined. Helen waved as she got out of the SUV, holding her phone and speaking loudly. "Daniel, you cannot ignore us. We are protecting the community." Daniel sighed softly and put down the hammer. He knew reasoning with her would take patience. "Good morning, Helen. I see you brought a friend. As I explained before, this is private property. I own it. I am working on my ranch. You are not allowed to interfere." Helen's frown deepened. "You will not make this easy. The HOA has rules, and you are breaking them. The sheriff may have ignored me yesterday, but that does not mean you are free to do anything." Daniel remained calm. "Ma'am, the sheriff has already explained that the HOA rules do not apply here. This property is outside your jurisdiction. I suggest you leave, or the law may take action against trespassing." Helen looked shocked for a moment, but her anger quickly returned. She turned to the woman with her. "See, he is lying again. We must do something now." Daniel noticed that the other woman looked uneasy. She seemed unsure whether to continue supporting Helen. Most of the HOA members had no real knowledge of the boundaries and rules, and Daniel's calm confidence was making them doubt her claims. At that moment, Daniel saw a sheriff's car approaching from the main road. He had called earlier to inform them that Helen might return. The officers stepped out quickly, speaking firmly. "Ma'am, you are on private property without permission. You are trespassing. Please leave immediately." Helen opened her mouth, ready to argue, but the officers raised their hands slightly. "This is your final warning. If you continue to interfere with the property owner, you will be officially trespassed and legal action will follow." Helen's face turned red with frustration. She realized that she could no longer intimidate Daniel. The officers made notes of the situation and left, making it clear that they would respond if Helen returned. Daniel turned back to the task at hand. He repaired the broken fence with renewed focus. Every post he set and every wire he stretched reminded him why he loved the ranch. This land was not just property. It was a place of freedom, peace, and purpose. By midday, the sun was high and the ranch looked neat and secure. Daniel stopped for lunch, sitting under a large oak tree near the barn. He watched the cattle grazing and listened to the wind rustling through the trees. The world felt right. Suddenly, a car approached again from the distant road. Daniel looked up and saw a delivery truck heading toward the barn. He waved, relieved that it was not Helen. The driver pulled up and handed him a package containing supplies he had ordered for fencing and barn repairs. Daniel thanked the driver and unpacked the materials. It was good to see things going smoothly for once. While he worked, Daniel thought about what he could do to prevent Helen from returning. Signs marking the property boundaries would help, and he also considered calling the sheriff in advance if she tried to interfere again. Knowledge and preparation were his best tools. In the afternoon, Daniel walked toward the eastern edge of the ranch. He noticed that the path near the tree line had been disturbed, as if someone had walked there recently. His heart remained calm, but he stayed alert. It was possible that Helen had returned earlier and tried to approach without being seen. Daniel marked the area and decided to install a small fence to guide visitors away from the main property. While measuring and digging post holes, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Hello, Daniel." He turned and saw a neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, who lived near the edge of the ranch but was not part of the HOA drama. She smiled politely. "I just wanted to make sure everything is okay. I know about Helen and her friends, but I wanted to check that you are safe." Daniel smiled back. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I am fine. I appreciate your concern. The property is secure and the sheriff has been helpful." Mrs. Wilson nodded. "It is good that you are calm and careful. People can get upset when rules do not apply the way they want, but you are handling it well." Daniel felt grateful for her kindness. It was nice to know that some neighbors understood the difference between law and personal opinion. "I want everyone to feel safe, including the animals," he said. "The ranch is peaceful and I want it to stay that way." Mrs. Wilson smiled and walked back toward her property. Daniel returned to work, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He hammered the last post into place and stretched the wire fencing tightly. The area was secure and he felt proud of the progress he had made. As evening approached, Daniel checked the barn doors and the gates once more. The sun cast long shadows across the fields, painting the landscape in gold and orange. It had been a productive day, and despite Helen's attempts to interfere, he had managed to keep the ranch peaceful. Just as he was finishing, he heard a familiar sound. A vehicle was coming from the main road. Daniel looked up and saw Helen's SUV again, but this time she was alone. She parked near the edge of the property and got out slowly. Daniel walked toward her calmly, maintaining a polite distance. "Helen, I see you are here again. Please remember that this is private property. You are not allowed to interfere or enter without permission." Helen's frown deepened. She seemed more frustrated than ever. "You cannot ignore me. I have to protect my neighborhood. You are disturbing the peace." Daniel shook his head. "Ma'am, I am not disturbing anyone. I am working on my property legally and peacefully. The sheriff has already warned you. Any further interference could result in legal action against you." Helen looked shocked for a moment. She had not expected Daniel to remain so calm and confident. Slowly, she got back into her SUV and drove away, muttering under her breath. Daniel watched her go, feeling relief but also a sense of victory. He returned to the barn, closed the doors, and walked toward his house. The ranch was quiet again. The wind carried the sound of cattle moving slowly, and the sky turned shades of pink and purple. Daniel felt content. Despite the challenges, he had maintained control, stayed calm, and protected his property. That night, as Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of tea, he thought about the lessons of the day. People like Helen could be persistent, but calm action, knowledge of the law, and patience could overcome conflict. His ranch was his sanctuary, and he had successfully defended it without anger or confrontation. As stars appeared in the sky, Daniel looked out over the fields. The ranch was peaceful, safe, and under his care. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, but he felt ready. He knew that standing firm, being prepared, and trusting in the truth would always guide him. And somewhere in Cedar Hills, Helen returned home, frustrated and confused once more. She had learned that rules only matter where they apply, and trying to impose them on others could lead to consequences she had not expected. The next morning, Daniel woke up with the first light of dawn. The ranch was quiet and calm, with mist rising gently from the fields. He felt a sense of satisfaction from the work he had done over the past days. The fences were repaired, the barn doors were secure, and the boundaries of the property were clearly marked. Despite Helen Granger's persistence, the ranch remained peaceful under his care. Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, listening to the soft sounds of nature. The wind carried the smell of fresh grass and soil, and the cattle moved slowly across the pastures. It was a perfect morning to continue his work. He planned to check the northern fields and make sure the fencing there was still strong. As he climbed into his truck, he noticed a small pile of letters near the mailbox. Curious, he stepped out to see who had delivered them. The first envelope was from the sheriff's office. Opening it, Daniel read carefully. The letter informed him that due to repeated complaints from Helen Granger, the sheriff's office would monitor the property more closely and would be prepared to act immediately if any harassment occurred. Daniel felt reassured. The law was clearly on his side, and any further attempts to intimidate him would be dealt with firmly. The other letters were from suppliers confirming delivery of additional fencing materials. Daniel smiled. It was good to know that work could continue without interruption. He loaded the supplies into his truck and drove toward the northern fields, ready to make repairs. As he worked, Daniel noticed movement near the tree line at the edge of the property. He looked up and saw Helen standing there again. She had parked her SUV at the road and was watching him. Daniel sighed. She had returned, determined to continue her efforts. He knew he had to remain calm and focused. Walking toward her slowly, he called out politely, "Good morning, Helen. I see you are here again. Please remember that this is private property. You are not allowed to interfere." Helen's face was red with frustration. "You cannot ignore me. I am part of the HOA. You are disturbing the neighborhood. You have to stop this." Daniel shook his head calmly. "Ma'am, this is my property. The sheriff has already explained that HOA rules do not apply here. I suggest you leave before legal action is taken against trespassing." Helen looked shocked for a moment, but quickly regained her defiant expression. "You cannot threaten me. This is wrong. I will find a way to stop you." Daniel nodded politely. "I am not threatening you. I am stating facts. The property is private and interference could have consequences. I am simply asking you to leave." Helen muttered angrily and returned to her SUV. As she drove away, Daniel noticed that she seemed even more determined than before. He knew this was not the end. People like her could be relentless, but he also knew that preparation and calm action were the best defense. By late morning, Daniel had finished repairing the northern fences. The ranch looked neat and secure. He decided to take a short break under a large oak tree near the barn. The sun was warm and the gentle breeze made the branches sway. He watched the cattle move slowly across the pastures and felt a sense of peace. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was the sheriff's office. "Good morning, Daniel," the officer said. "We wanted to check in. We received a report that Helen Granger may attempt to enter your property again today. We will have a unit nearby to ensure there is no harassment or interference." Daniel smiled, feeling reassured. "Thank you. I appreciate your support. I will continue my work and I hope it remains peaceful today." The sheriff agreed and reminded him to document any incidents. Daniel hung up and returned to the barn to organize tools and fencing supplies. He knew that preparation was key to preventing future problems. By afternoon, Daniel had installed additional signs marking the boundaries of the ranch. They were clear, visible, and polite, stating that the property was private and that trespassing was prohibited. He also reinforced the fencing near the road, making it difficult for anyone to enter without permission. As he worked, he thought about how Helen had escalated her actions over the past days. She had tried to intimidate him, involve neighbors, and even call the sheriff multiple times. But each time, Daniel had remained calm and relied on the law. He realized that knowledge, patience, and clear communication were stronger than anger and persistence. While inspecting the western pasture, Daniel saw movement near the far edge of the property. This time, it was not Helen alone. She had returned with a small group of people, including a few neighbors who seemed persuaded by her claims. Daniel knew he had to handle the situation carefully. He walked slowly toward the group, maintaining a polite distance. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "This is private property. You are not allowed to enter or interfere. Please leave immediately." Helen stepped forward, waving her phone. "You cannot ignore us. We are protecting the neighborhood." "You must stop this." Daniel remained composed. "Ma'am, I have explained multiple times that this land is private. The sheriff has already warned you. Interference could result in legal action. I suggest you leave." The neighbors looked uneasy. They whispered among themselves, clearly unsure whether to support Helen. Daniel noticed their hesitation and continued calmly. "I want everyone to understand the truth. This property is outside your HOA. I am allowed to work here and maintain it as I wish. The law supports me. I hope you can respect that." Helen fumed but realized she was losing support. Slowly, the group began to back away. The sheriff's unit arrived just in time, walking toward the property line to monitor the situation. They spoke firmly to Helen. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. You are trespassing. Any further interference will result in legal action." Helen looked frustrated and defeated. She got into her SUV and drove away, muttering under her breath. The neighbors left quietly, relieved that the situation was resolved without conflict. Daniel returned to the barn, feeling a sense of relief. The ranch was peaceful again, and the sheriff had ensured that no further trouble would occur that day. He checked the fences one more time and secured the barn doors. Everything was in order. As evening approached, Daniel walked to the top of a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the fields stretched endlessly. The cattle moved slowly, grazing peacefully. Daniel felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. He realized that protecting the ranch was not just about physical fences or legal papers. It was also about staying calm, being prepared, and relying on reason and law. Helen's attempts to intimidate him had failed because he remained steady and focused. By nightfall, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The stars appeared in the sky and the ranch was quiet. The wind rustled through the trees, and the soft sounds of animals moving in the fields created a peaceful melody. Daniel felt a sense of victory. He had faced unnecessary conflict and remained calm. His property was secure, and the sheriff's support ensured that no further harassment would occur that day. He had learned that knowledge, preparation, and patience were stronger than anger and persistence. And somewhere in Cedar Hills, Helen returned home once more, frustrated and confused. She had learned a difficult lesson. Rules only apply where they belong, and trying to impose them on others could lead to consequences she had not expected. For Daniel, the ranch remained a sanctuary. It was a place of freedom, peace, and purpose. He was ready for whatever challenges might come next, confident that calm action, preparation, and knowledge would always guide him. The morning sun rose over Cedar Ranch, casting golden light across the fields. Daniel woke early, feeling a sense of calm and satisfaction. The past days had been challenging, but he had successfully protected his property and ensured that his ranch remained a peaceful place. Today he wanted to focus on finishing small projects around the barn and checking the fences one last time. He sipped his coffee on the porch, enjoying the quiet sounds of the ranch. The wind rustled gently through the trees and the cattle moved slowly across the pastures. Daniel knew that peace could be fragile, but he felt confident. The sheriff's support, the clear property boundaries, and the reinforced fences had made it difficult for anyone to interfere. After breakfast, Daniel climbed into his truck and drove toward the barn. He had a few repairs to complete and supplies to organize. As he worked, he noticed movement near the northern boundary of the ranch. Squinting against the sunlight, he saw a familiar black SUV parked on the road. Helen Granger had returned. This time her expression was a mix of frustration and determination. She stepped out of the vehicle holding her phone, clearly planning to make another complaint. Daniel sighed. He had expected her persistence, but he remained calm, knowing that the law was on his side. Walking slowly toward her, Daniel called out politely, "Good morning, Helen. I see you are here again. Please remember that this is private property. You are not allowed to interfere." Helen's frown deepened. "I cannot let this continue. You are disturbing the neighborhood. I will not leave until something is done." Daniel shook his head calmly. "Ma'am, this property is private, outside any HOA rules. The sheriff has already explained this to you. If you continue to interfere, legal action could follow." Helen hesitated for a moment, realizing that Daniel remained calm and firm. The sheriff's presence yesterday had clearly left an impression. She muttered under her breath but did not respond further. As she turned to get back into her SUV, Daniel noticed the sheriff's car approaching from the main road. Two officers stepped out and spoke to Helen in a calm but firm tone. "Ma'am, you have been warned multiple times. You are trespassing. Any further interference will result in official legal action, including possible charges." Helen's face turned red. She opened her mouth to argue, but the officers continued. "The property owner has every right to work and maintain his ranch. Your actions have already been documented. If you return without permission, you will be officially trespassed and could face further consequences." Helen muttered angrily but finally got into her SUV. Daniel watched as she drove away, realizing that this time the law had made it clear. He felt a sense of relief. For the first time, it seemed that Helen understood she could no longer interfere without serious consequences. With the threat removed, Daniel focused on finishing his work. He repaired the last section of fencing near the barn and checked the water troughs for the cattle. Every task completed brought a sense of satisfaction. The ranch was secure, the barn organized, and the animals calm. By midday, Daniel had organized his tools and stacked supplies neatly in the barn. The ranch looked orderly and peaceful. He walked through the fields, checking fences and gates, ensuring everything was in perfect condition. Each fence post, each gate lock reminded him of the effort it took to protect what was his. While inspecting the eastern field, he saw a familiar figure approaching from the distance. It was Mrs. Wilson, the neighbor who had been supportive and understanding throughout the conflict. She walked toward Daniel with a smile. "Good afternoon, Daniel," she said. "I just wanted to check on you and make sure everything is all right. I heard about Helen and her persistence, but I am glad you are safe." Daniel smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Everything is fine. The sheriff has been very helpful and the property is secure." "I appreciate your concern," Mrs. Wilson nodded. "It is good to see that you handled this calmly. People like Helen can be difficult, but you remained patient and prepared. That is the best way to protect your property." Daniel felt grateful for her words. "It has been a challenge, but I believe staying calm and knowing my rights is the best approach. This ranch is my home and I want it to stay peaceful." Mrs. Wilson smiled and walked back toward her property. Daniel returned to the barn to complete his last tasks for the day. He fixed the barn door hinges and checked the storage area for tools. Everything was in order. The ranch was finally completely secure. As evening approached, the sky turned orange and pink. Daniel walked to the top of a small hill that overlooked the ranch. The fields stretched endlessly, the cattle grazed peacefully, and the barn stood sturdy and strong. The wind blew gently, carrying the soft sounds of the ranch. Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction and pride. He thought about the lessons he had learned. Helen's persistence had been a test of patience and calmness. By remaining polite, firm, and informed about the law, he had been able to protect his property without anger or conflict. Knowledge, preparation, and patience had proven stronger than intimidation and false authority. Daniel decided to take one last step to secure the ranch. He installed additional signage, clearly stating the property boundaries and warning that trespassing would result in legal action. He also created a simple plan to document any future incidents, ensuring that if anyone tried to interfere again, he would have clear evidence to support his rights. Night fell, and the ranch became quiet. Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the soft sounds of nature. The stars appeared in the sky, and the fields stretched endlessly in the gentle moonlight. For the first time in days, he felt completely at peace. Somewhere in Cedar Hills, Helen returned home once more. She had learned a difficult lesson. The sheriff's warnings, the legal boundaries, and Daniel's calm resolve made it clear that her attempts to impose HOA rules on land that was not hers were useless. She could not control what was not under her authority. Daniel leaned back on his porch chair, looking out over the ranch. The land was safe, the animals were calm, and the barn was secure. He had protected his property without conflict, relying on calm action, preparation, and respect for the law. The ranch was his sanctuary, and he would continue to care for it with pride and patience. As the night grew quiet, Daniel reflected on the experience. People like Helen could be persistent, but patience, knowledge, and calmness always prevailed. By respecting boundaries and trusting the truth, he had maintained peace and ensured that the ranch remained a place of freedom and safety. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, as ranch life always did, but Daniel felt ready. He had proven that standing firm, staying calm, and relying on the law could overcome challenges. His ranch was secure, and he had earned a deep sense of pride and satisfaction. The stars shone brightly over Cedar Ranch. The wind carried the soft sound of cattle moving slowly, and the night was peaceful. Daniel knew that no matter what challenges came, he could face them with calmness, preparation, and confidence. The ranch was his home, his sanctuary, and his freedom. And somewhere in Cedar Hills, Helen finally realized that persistence alone could not change the truth. Rules only applied where they belonged, and trying to impose them elsewhere could lead to consequences. For Daniel, the ranch remained safe, peaceful, and completely under his care. It was the end of a long week of challenges, but also the beginning of a new chapter. Daniel knew that the ranch would continue to thrive, that peace had been restored, and that he had defended what was rightfully his. He smiled, feeling a deep connection to the land, the animals, and the freedom that came with owning his own property. The ranch was quiet now, the barn doors locked, fences secure, and the cattle grazing under the moonlight. Daniel finished his tea, set the cup down, and looked at the stars. Everything was as it should be. He was home, his property was safe, and the lessons of patience, calmness, and preparation would stay with him forever. Cedar Ranch had survived the storm of unnecessary conflict. And Daniel had proven that respect for the law and calm action could overcome even the most persistent challenges. The land, the barn, and the animals were safe, and Daniel could finally rest knowing that his sanctuary was secure.